They called him the Red Angel, but before the wings of rage unfurled, he was just a child, one born in chains. On the blood-soaked arenas of Nuceria, Angron's first cries were drowned by screams of dying slaves. He was raised not by love, but by cruelty. Each day, forced to kill for the amusement of masters who had long forgotten mercy. His only companions were the butcher's nails, twisted implants that fed on his pain, tearing his sanity apart in exchange for strength. And yet, somewhere within the beast, a spark of humanity remained. A voice that whispered, "I only wanted freedom." When the Emperor finally found him, he did not save Angron. He took him, teleported away from his dying brothers, leaving their corpses behind on the red sands. In that moment, something inside Angron shattered forever. He did not see a father. He saw a thief, one who stole his only purpose, to die with those he loved. The galaxy would pay for that betrayal. The Emperor had gained a son, but lost a soul. Now 10,000 years later, his name is spoken only in fear. A demon Primarch of Khorne, the embodiment of wrath and bloodlust. When Angron descends upon a world, even the sky bleeds. Armies crumble, not from defeat, but from terror, for they face a being who no longer feels pain, only rage. But the question remains, did the Emperor create a monster? Or did he simply reveal what humanity truly is when stripped of hope? This is the story of Angron, the Emperor's greatest mistake. A tragedy written in blood, and remembered only by screams. The story of Angron does not begin with glory. It begins with screams not far from the golden halls of Terra. Under the red skies of Nuceria, a child was born in captivity. His first breath carried the dust of blood and ash. His first lullaby was the sound of chains. There were no angels to bless him, no scholars to record his name. Only the overseers, pale, cruel men who bred slaves like animals and made them fight for the amusement of nobles who called themselves gods. That nameless child grew among the pits, where sunlight was a myth and mercy a forgotten word. The sand beneath his feet was always wet, not from rain, but from blood that had never dried. The crowd above chanted not names, but numbers. For the people of Nuceria, death was entertainment, and pain, a language every child learned before speech. Angron grew fast, stronger than any human they had seen. When he fought, it was not for victory, it was for survival. Every wound carved stories into his flesh. Every broken bone reminded him he still lived. And yet, deep in that ocean of cruelty, something flickered, a sense of honor. He fought not to kill, but to protect the weak among the slaves. When the overseers threw children into the pit for punishment, Angron stepped forward. He took their place. He bore the pain so others wouldn't have to. But kindness is weakness in a world built on cruelty. The masters saw it and laughed. They wanted not a man, but a weapon. And so one night, they carved open his skull and buried the butcher's nails deep inside his mind. The procedure was older than the Imperium, a relic of lost science, designed to turn empathy into rage, fear into bloodlust. The nails didn't just torment him. They rewired his soul. Every heartbeat became agony, every calm moment unbearable silence. Only through violence could the pain fade. Only through killing could he feel peace. Imagine that. A child forced to slaughter just to stop the screaming in his own head. The nails made him unstoppable, a storm of flesh and fury that painted the pits red. The crowd adored their new champion. They called him Angron, after the old word for anger. The name fit too perfectly. But behind the blood, behind the endless killing. He was still searching for a face in the crowd that would look upon him not as a beast, but as a man. It never came. Only whips, chains, and applause. Years turned into decades, and Angron's legend grew. He united the gladiators, turning them from entertainment into rebellion. He taught them to fight for freedom, not spectacle. In secret, beneath the Colosseums, they trained, they bled, and they planned. And when the day came, they tore their chains apart and stormed the city above. It was no longer a game. It was vengeance. The sky burned crimson that day, smoke and fire rising from every tower. Angron led his brothers through the streets, cutting down their masters, liberating slaves who had never known the taste of freedom. He should have been the hero of Nuceria. But heroes are luxuries in the grimdark future. The slavers unleashed their armies, war machines and soldiers armed with ancient weapons. The rebellion was crushed city by city. Angron fought to the last, his body broken, his army dying around him. And still, he refused to retreat. He swore to die alongside them, to bleed with the only family he had ever known. Then came the light, blinding, cold, unnatural. A golden figure descended from the stars, the Emperor of mankind. He did not speak. He did not kneel. With a gesture, Angron and his closest warriors vanished from the battlefield, teleported aboard the Emperor's ship in orbit. Below them, Nuceria burned. The rebellion died screaming. Angron awoke in silence, his chains gone, his wounds healed, but something inside him was dead. The Emperor spoke of destiny, of brotherhood, of the Great Crusade. He called Angron son, but all Angron could hear were the dying screams of his brothers, the family. He had sworn never to abandon the butchers. Nails screamed louder than ever. He struck the walls of his chamber, roaring in rage, in grief, in betrayal. The golden man before him, who claimed to be his father, had done what no slaver could. He had taken his freedom of choice. The Emperor had not saved him. He had stolen him. From that moment, Angron belonged to no one. Not to the Imperium, not to the Emperor, not even to himself. His soul had been torn apart, half still trapped in the sands of Nuceria, half screaming inside a cage of gold. And though history would remember him as a monster, as a demon, as the Red Angel, the truth is far more tragic. He was a child who never stopped trying to be free. A boy who wanted peace, but found only war. A slave who rose to defy his chains, and was punished for daring to dream. The galaxy would call him cursed. But on that day, in the burning arenas of Nuceria, it was not the slaves who were damned. It was the Emperor's mercy itself, for in saving Angron, he created his greatest mistake. There are many ways to kill a man. You can take his heart. You can take his hope. But on Nuceria, they found a way to kill the soul and still leave the body breathing. They called it the butcher's nails. Tiny machines, shards of old, lost technology grafted deep into the brain's pleasure centers. Devices that turned agony into addiction, rage into survival. The more the victim fought, the more the nails rewarded him. Until violence became the only thing that felt real. When they were implanted into Angron, he was still a youth. A boy, strong enough to break chains, but not yet strong enough to understand what pain can do to a mind. The surgeons didn't use anesthetics, pain was the point. They carved through his skull with rusted tools, pushing the nails in like rusted daggers, while he screamed until his voice tore apart. And when it was done, silence. Then came the whisper, A hum inside his skull, faint at first, like the buzz of insects behind the eyes. But as days passed, it grew. It became rhythm, a pulse, a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Every moment of stillness hurt. Every breath without violence became unbearable pressure, like fire building inside the skull. He would punch walls until his knuckles split, just to quiet the sound. He would lash out at ghosts, just to feel the pain fade for a second. The butcher's nails were not weapons. They were masters. They didn't just live inside his brain. They fed on him. Every surge of anger, every violent act released a flood of endorphins that numbed the agony, tricking his mind into craving more. It was the cruelest form of slavery imaginable, one that made the cage invisible. Because now, every act of kindness, every attempt at calm, was punished by torment. And so Angron learned to live in motion. To fight because stillness hurt more than death. The nails changed everything. They erased the line between man and beast. His compassion twisted into fury. His memories became blurred red fog. Yet, within the storm, fragments of humanity clung to him like dying embers. He remembered faces, the other gladiators, the brothers who looked to him for strength. In their eyes, he saw the last reflection of who he had been. They didn't see a monster. They saw a leader. And that frightened him more than the pain ever could, because the nails had given him power, and he hated it. He knew what it made him do. Sometimes, in the middle of battle, when his rage peaked and the nails screamed the loudest, he would lose time. One moment he'd be fighting, the next he'd be surrounded by corpses, some of them his own friends. And for a heartbeat, the pain would vanish. Then, when the realization hit, it returned tenfold. The nails punished regret. They punished thought. Angron stopped crying long before he stopped bleeding. In the rare hours when he could rest, he tried to sleep. But sleep was worse. The nails didn't stop when he dreamed. They sang. Soft, mechanical hymns that whispered of endless slaughter. He would wake with blood on his tongue, claw marks on his arms, and the smell of death in his nostrils. It was during those long nights that he began to understand what the nails truly were. They were not a punishment. They were a message. Someone, somewhere in the dark age of humanity, had built them, not as torture devices, but as tools. A weapon to create warriors who felt no hesitation, no mercy, no fear. A perfect army for a long-forgotten war. On Nuceria, that ancient horror had found its way into the hands of sadists. And Angron became their masterpiece. But in every masterpiece of cruelty, there lies rebellion. Angron's mind fractured, yes, but not completely. He began to hate the nails, to hate the way they made him need violence. He realized that his anger wasn't freedom. It was just another chain. So he began to use it. To direct it, he turned his pain into leadership. Every scream became a rallying cry. Every scar, a reminder of what they were fighting against. When he led his brothers in the rebellion, it wasn't just against their slavers. It was against the idea of control itself. Against the very concept of the nails and the gods or men who had built them. He would rather die roaring in defiance than live one more day obeying a machine inside his skull. But destiny had other plans, even after the rebellion's fall. Even after the Emperor stole him from the world he tried to free. The nails remained, screaming inside his mind, louder than ever. The Emperor, for all his power, could not remove them. He tried once, and nearly killed Angron in the process. The Primarch's body could heal any wound, But the nails were fused to his essence. There was no Angron without the nails, no peace without the pain. As centuries passed, as he led the World Eaters across countless battlefields, the line between agony and identity dissolved completely. The nails no longer needed to drive him, he became them. Every act of violence, every river of blood, fed the rhythm inside his skull until it became the drumbeat of his existence. That's the final cruelty of the butcher's nails. They don't just destroy who you are. They rewrite you until pain feels like purpose, and rage feels like love. And so Angron marched on, drenched in blood, crowned in fury, deaf to everything but the song that never stopped. He wasn't just wearing his curse. He was the curse. And in the silence between battles, when the nails quieted for just a breath, he would remember the boy he once was, the chains he broke, the faces of those he failed to save. Then the hum would return, sharp and hungry. And Angron would welcome it, because the pain was all he had left to remind him he was still alive. The rebellion of Nuceria was doomed from the start. For every slave that broke their chains, 100 soldiers rose to crush them. The world itself seemed to bleed, its skies blackened by smoke and its streets flooded with fire. And at the heart of that chaos stood Angron. He was half dead, half divine, drenched in blood, breathing fury. The butcher's nails howled in his skull like iron wasps, but he didn't care. Around him, his brothers fell one by one, men and women who had called him brother, father, savior. And as they died, the nails grew quiet. For the first time in years, Angron felt peace, not because the pain had ended, but because he knew it soon would. He would die free. He would die beside his people. And that was all he had ever wanted. But the galaxy had other plans. From the heavens above Nuceria, a golden light tore the clouds apart. Not sunlight, not fire, something older, purer. And from that blinding storm descended a figure clad in radiant armor, his eyes burning with the light of a dying star. The soldiers of Nuceria dropped their weapons in awe. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The Emperor of mankind had come. He looked upon Angron and saw not a broken slave, but a lost son, one of the Primarchs scattered across the galaxy long ago. A fragment of his own creation. His expression was calm, almost serene. But in that calmness, there was something colder than any cruelty Angron had ever known. The Emperor spoke, and his words were law. Your struggle is over, my son. Come with me. Your destiny awaits. But Angron didn't kneel. He didn't understand. Destiny? What destiny? His brothers were dying below. He didn't in destiny. He needed time. He needed to finish what he started, to stand beside them until the end. He shouted in defiance. His voice was thunder. I will not abandon them. The Emperor did not argue. He did not threaten. He simply reached out his hand, and in an instant, Angron and his chosen few vanished from the battlefield, ripped from the burning soil of Nuceria, and placed aboard a ship, high above the clouds. Below. The rebellion died screaming. The silence that followed was suffocating. The nails screamed inside Angron's skull, louder than ever. His brothers' voices echoed in his mind, their dying roars twisting into ghosts of blame. He slammed his fists into the ship's walls, roaring in rage and agony. Send me back. Let me die with them. But the Emperor only watched. His golden aura filled the chamber like sunlight over a corpse. They are already dead, my son, he said. You have greater battles to fight. greater battles, greater purpose. But what purpose justifies betrayal? For Angron, there was no glory in survival bought with cowardice. He felt his strength fail him. His heart pounded. His breath came in broken gasps. And then the rage came again, red, blinding, endless. The nails fed on it. He struck the Emperor. The blow should have shattered a mountain. It didn't even move the golden figure. The Emperor looked at him not with anger, but with sorrow, or something that resembled sorrow. Shaped by someone who no longer remembered what sorrow truly felt like, and that made it worse. Angron's rage wasn't just at the Emperor's power, it was at his indifference. The same way his masters had watched him bleed for their amusement, the Emperor now watched him suffer in silence. The difference was only in scale. One owned his body. The other claimed his soul. The Emperor called this act mercy. But to Angron, it was the cruelest punishment of all. Days passed aboard the ship. The Emperor tried to speak with him about unity, about brotherhood, about the great crusade to bring light to the galaxy. Angron said nothing. He sat in silence, staring out at the void. In that darkness he could almost hear Nuceria burning, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw them, the gladiators who had fought beside him, torn apart in the dirt. Their eyes, their screams, their faith in him. The butcher's nails whispered softly, almost tenderly. You left them. You left them to die. He clawed at his head until blood ran down his face. But the whispers didn't stop. The Emperor ordered his finest healers to examine him, to remove the nails. They tried once. The result was horror. The implants had fused with Angron's nervous system, intertwined with his essence. Removal would have destroyed his mind completely. So the Emperor stopped trying. Instead, he built an army around Angron, the 12th Legion Astartes, the World Eaters. Warriors designed to channel his fury, to mirror his rage, to make use of his pain. To the Emperor, it was strategy. To Angron, it was mockery. He saw the Legion as a reflection of his curse. Soldiers bred to obey, to fight, to kill without question. Just like the slaves he had tried to free. He looked into their faces and saw his own damnation staring back. The Emperor called it loyalty. Angron called it slavery with a new name. He tried to run once, to return to Nuceria, to die where he was meant to die. The Emperor forbade it. He sent entire fleets to retrieve him. And when they brought him back, Angron's silence was broken. He looked into the Emperor's eyes and said, You took me from my death. You took my peace. Now you will have my rage. And so began a war that would last 10,000 years, not between armies, but between father and son, between freedom and control, between the dream of unity and the nightmare of obedience. Because the Emperor believed he had saved Angron. But in truth, he had only changed the name of his prison. There are many ways to break a man. You can chain his body, starve him, torture him, tear away everything he loves. But the cruelest way, the one the Emperor perfected, is to make him believe his suffering has meaning. Angron tried to believe. He truly did. The Emperor called him son, and for a brief, flickering moment, that word meant something. The other Primarchs, his brothers, spoke of duty, destiny, glory. They knelt before their father, bathed in his light, and Angron tried to kneel too. But every time he did, he heard the nails. They whispered through the pain, gnawing at his mind like a swarm of insects. You are still a slave. The World Eaters followed him into war, thousands of them, armored in red and white, their chain axes roaring across worlds. To outsiders, they looked like gods of battle. To Angron, they were echoes, ghosts of his fallen gladiators, reborn in metal and rage. But where they fought, the ground died, cities burned. Civilians vanished. There was no honor, no mercy. Only slaughter, and every victory felt hollow because none of it was his. It was the Emperor's will, every campaign, every order, every target. Even his rage was a tool in someone else's hand. The Emperor called it unity. Angron called it obedience wrapped in gold. He began to see the pattern. The Imperium wasn't built on freedom, it was built on control. Each legion, each Primarch, a weapon to be aimed where the Emperor chose. And Angron, with his broken mind and his endless fury, was the perfect weapon. That realization was the first betrayal. The second came from within. The World Eaters adored their father. They worshipped him. But as the wars grew bloodier, as Angron's rage grew harder to contain, many began to fear him. Captains whispered behind sealed helmets. Chaplains spoke of restraint, of discipline, of loyalty to the Emperor above all else. Ngr unheard them. He always heard them. The nails made sure of that. Their whispers twisted every doubt into a dagger. One day, after a brutal siege on a rebel world, Angron summoned his captains. The air in the hall was thick with the smell of oil and blood. He paced before them, a beast barely contained. "You think I am unworthy," he said. "You think your Emperor is the true master of your souls." No one spoke. None dared. Angron's voice dropped to a growl. "Then kneel to him, not to me." One by one, they knelt, not out of faith, but fear. And in that moment, Angron understood. They did not love him. They served because the Emperor commanded it. His own sons were slaves, just like he had been. That was the third betrayal, and it broke something inside him that could never be repaired. From then on, the nails screamed louder. Their hunger for violence became insatiable. They demanded more blood, more war, more chaos. And Angron, drowning in their noise, began to lose himself. His legion followed, willingly, desperately, because what else could they do? Their father's rage became their creed. Their armor grew darker, their laughter harsher, their prayers more hollow. The Imperium began to whisper that the 12th Legion had lost control, that Angron was unfit, that the Emperor would have to act, and he did. When the word-bearers burned Monarchia, when the Emperor humiliated another son in front of his legion, Angron watched from afar. He saw how the Emperor's justice worked, not with mercy, but with fear. He saw Logar's faith crushed, and he recognized the same hand that had torn him from Nuceria that day. Angron understood a truth so terrible it almost made him laugh. They were never sons. They were weapons forged, numbered, and used. The heresy began as whispers. A single word, spreading like infection through the legions, freedom. And when Horus spoke it, when the War Master promised a galaxy where they would fight for themselves, not for the Emperor's tyranny, Angron listened. He didn't trust Horus. He didn't trust anyone. But the idea of rebellion, the idea of striking back at the one who had stolen his death, his peace, his very will, that was something the nails understood. The Emperor called it treason. Angron called it truth. And so he turned. When the World Eaters declared for Horus, the galaxy itself seemed to recoil. Once they fought for the dream of mankind, now they fought for blood. Worlds burned not for conquest, but for satisfaction. Whole populations were torn apart to silence the nails, even for a moment. And yet, there was freedom in it. Mad, terrible freedom. Angron no longer pretended to be a son or a hero. He was a monster, and he accepted it. The galaxy had made him one. The Emperor had made him one, but the final betrayal came when even the gods took notice, when the warp itself looked upon Angron's rage and smiled. They offered him release. Not mercy, not peace, but something else. Immortality through damnation. A promise that the nails would never scream again. And when Angron accepted, when he ascended into daemonhood, becoming the Red Angel, the living avatar of endless war, the last piece of his humanity burned away. The Emperor had once tried to save him. But salvation, in this universe, is just another form of control. There are moments in the history of the galaxy that feel less like events, and more like wounds. Scars in time that never heal, no matter how many millennia pass. The ascension of Angron, the birth of the Red Angel, was one of those moments. When Horus's rebellion ignited the galaxy, it was a war of ideologies for some. But for Angron, it was simply permission. Permission to unleash every ounce of rage he had ever buried beneath pain and chains. The world eaters became the embodiment of that rage. They tore through imperial worlds with apocalyptic fury. Their ships descended like falling blades, their warriors chanting Angron's name as if it were a curse and a prayer at once. They no longer fought for glory, or empire, or brotherhood. They fought because it hurt less than silence. But even among the madness of the Heresy, Angron was different. Other traitor Primarchs plotted, schemed, made alliances with gods. Angron did none of that. He had no interest in the politics of chaos, only in destruction. Where Horus sought victory, Angron sought extinction. He fought like a storm-given flesh, unstoppable, mindless, perfect in his fury. Even his brothers began to fear him. On one battlefield after another, his rage grew so vast it seemed to warp reality itself. And somewhere deep within that storm, something ancient was watching. The warp is a sea of emotion, and rage is its purest current. For every scream Angron unleashed, the warp screamed back. For every drop of blood spilled, the immaterium rippled with hunger. The gods of chaos, those eternal parasites of mortal emotion, began to whisper. They did not tempt him with promises of power or beauty. They offered him only one thing: silence, no more nails, no more torment. Just eternal war, pure and unending. Angron didn't understand that this was no salvation. He only knew that he wanted the pain to stop, even if it meant losing himself completely. It happened on Nuceria, the world where it had all begun, the world that had broken him. Horus sent him there to destroy it, to erase the last trace of the Emperor's failure. Angron saw it as fate. When his armies landed, Nuceria resisted, hopelessly, desperately, as they had once before. But this time, there was no rebellion, no courage, only annihilation. The sky turned red. The ground split open under the weight of his fury. The screams of the dying merged with the howls of demons breaking through the veil. And in that infernal storm, the nails finally went silent. Angron fell to his knees, his body convulsing, his armor cracking under forces no mortal could endure. His warriors watched in terror as his flesh melted and reformed, his bones twisting into monstrous shapes. Wings of blood and brass tore through his back. His roar shook the heavens. Angron was gone. The Red Angel had taken his place, a demon Primarch, the living weapon of Khorne, the god of war and slaughter. His transformation was not beautiful. It was not even glorious. It was obscene, a brutal parody of evolution. Every part of him that had once been human was burned away, leaving only the essence of fury. The World Eaters fell to their knees, not out of devotion, but instinct, animals bowing before the apex of their kind. And the warp itself screamed in triumph. From that day forward, Angron was no longer bound by mortal limits. His rage became eternal, his strength infinite, his soul chained to Khorne's throne. Wherever he went, worlds died. Armies burned. Planets bled. But the cruel irony was this: even in his new form, the silence didn't last. The nails were gone, but their echo remained. His daemonhood didn't heal the wound. It made it eternal. His mind was a maelstrom of agony and ecstasy. His will drowned beneath the endless roar of Khorne's laughter. He had traded one master for another, and deep within the storm that was his soul, a single thought remained, faint, buried beneath oceans of rage, a memory of what he once was. The boy who had tried to save his brothers. The slave who had fought for freedom. Sometimes, in the rare moments between battles, the Red Angel would fall silent, his eyes burning not with fury, but with something older. Regret, perhaps. Or memory. But those moments never lasted. The galaxy is not kind to monsters who remember they were once human. During the Siege of Terra, Angron descended upon the throne world itself, leading tides of demons and berserkers into the Emperor's city. The walls trembled. The sky burned. And at the heart of that apocalypse, the Red Angel came face to face with the father who had damned him. It was not a duel. It was not even a battle. It was the inevitable collision of two tragedies, one forged from pride, the other from pain. The Emperor struck him down, banishing his form back into the warp. But you cannot kill what no longer truly lives. Angron returned again and again across the millennia, each time more monstrous, more detached from the mortal shell he had once worn. Now 10,000 years later, he still roams the stars, a storm of brass and blood, forever searching for peace he can never find. Worlds shatter beneath his wings, and mortals whisper his name like a curse. They call him the Red Angel, but perhaps a better name is the Emperor's guilt, because Angron's story is not just about rage. It is about failure, the failure of a father to save his son, the failure of a god to understand the human heart. In a galaxy built on war, Angron was not its greatest monster. He was its most honest reflection. 10,000 years after the flames of the Horus Heresy died out, the galaxy did not heal. It only learned to bleed quietly. Empires rebuilt themselves from ash. Faith replaced reason, and the Imperium of man, once a vision of unity, became a rotting carcass draped in gold. And somewhere in the endless dark between the stars, the Red Angel stirred once more. For most of those 10 millennia, Angron was less a being and more a storm trapped within the warp, a hurricane of hate circling the throne of Khorne, his existence consumed by endless battle. To mortal minds he was a myth, a nightmare, the god of slaughter's favorite son, unleashed only when the universe needed to remember what true fear looked like. But then, something changed. The galaxy tore itself open. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, split reality like a wound across the stars. The warp and real space collided, birthing a new age of madness. Empires fell overnight. Billions vanished in screams that never ended, and in that scream, the Red Angel awoke. No longer bound, no longer silent, Angron clawed his way back into reality with the fury of a dying god. His return wasn't an invasion. It was an eruption, A planet called Malakbael was the first to feel it. The skies split into rivers of blood. The ground shook with the pounding of invisible drums. Then came the sound, a single roar that echoed through the warp and across half a sector, shaking ships from orbit and shattering mortal minds. When the smoke cleared, there he was, towering above the ruins, his wings dripping molten brass, his body wreathed in red flame. The Red Angel reborn, and behind him his sons followed, the remnants of the World Eaters, warped beyond recognition. Their armor was a patchwork of brass and bone, their laughter insane, their devotion absolute. They had waited for 10,000 years. Now they marched again. They called it the Red Path, a pilgrimage of slaughter, a crusade of blood to honor their demon Primarch. Every world they touched was left in ruins. Oceans boiled. Cities vanished. The air itself screamed. Angron didn't command them with words. He didn't need to. His presence alone drove mortals and Astartes alike into madness. Those who looked upon him for too long went blind. Those who heard his voice too closely began tearing at their own flesh. Unable to contain the echo of his fury, the Imperium tried to respond. Fleets were dispatched. Armies mobilized. But how do you fight something that doesn't fight for victory, only for annihilation? On the world of Malakbael, the Imperial defenders stood their ground for 13 days. The planet's sky burned red the entire time. On the 14th, Angron descended into the capital and shattered the city with his bare hands. The last surviving Vox transmission from the surface was a single broken phrase. He does not kill us for hate. He kills us because he cannot stop. That line became a legend whispered by soldiers across the Imperium, a grim prayer, half pity and half fear. Because in some dark corner of their souls, they understood. Angron wasn't a villain. He was a wound that never healed. When the Primarch Robut Guilliman returned to lead the Imperium once more, even he spoke of Angron with a kind of weary dread. Some sins, he said, can never be undone, only endured. And so, as the age of the Imperium entered its darkest chapter, the Red Angel carved his path across the stars. He struck without pattern, without purpose, or so it seemed. But those who studied the blood-soaked trail began to notice something. The worlds he destroyed were all tied to the past. Each one bore relics of the Great Crusade, memorials, archives, even ruins of the Emperor's palaces. Angron was not rampaging without thought. He was burning away history itself, erasing the memory of his father's dream. Every act of slaughter was a message. Every massacre, a scream hurled across eternity. You made me. You forgot me. Now remember me. And yet, somewhere in that endless carnage, there were whispers of something stranger. Survivors spoke of seeing him pause, for seconds, sometimes minutes, before the slaughter began. Standing motionless, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Some claimed he was haunted. Others that he was remembering because even the Red Angel, the eternal demon of rage, could not escape the echo of what he once was: a son, a brother, a slave who tried to be free. Those moments never lasted long. The roar always returned, drowning everything. But they were there, tiny cracks in the armor of an immortal monster. The priests of Khorne say those pauses are weakness. The Inquisition calls them corruption of a demon's purpose. But perhaps they are something else. Perhaps they are all that remains of Angron's humanity, a curse, not a mercy, because immortality, for a soul like his, is not a reward. It is a sentence not to fight forever. to bleed forever, to remember and yet never escape what he has become. And as the galaxy spirals into new wars, new crusades, and new betrayals, the red path continues. Wherever there is battle, he is there, unseen at first, then rising like a shadow made of fire and hatred. The Emperor sits silent on his throne. His sons are scattered, broken, divided. But Angron endures, not because of faith, not because of purpose, but because the galaxy itself still mirrors his pain. Every act of cruelty, every war, every meaningless death, they feed him. The universe keeps him alive because it cannot stop killing itself. And maybe that's the final horror of Angron's story, that he was never truly separate from humanity's nature. He was its truest reflection, given monstrous form. The Red Angel is not just a demon. He is the consequence of a father's arrogance, a son's suffering, and a civilization built on violence. And as long as humanity exists, so will Angron. For 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat upon the golden throne, silent, unmoving, decaying. To the Imperium, he is a god. To his enemies, a corpse. But to those who still remember what he truly was, he is something else entirely. A father who could not save his son. Of all his creations, of all 20 Primarchs born from his hand and stolen by the warp, none haunted him more than Angron. Not Horus the betrayer, not Magnus the fool, not even Fulgrim the damned. Only Angron, because Horus betrayed him by choice. Angron, he made this way. The Emperor's plan had always been clear, to build a perfect species, each Primarch reflecting an aspect of his will. Warriors, scholars, leaders, gods in flesh. But there was one flaw in that plan, humanity itself. When the Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy, they did not land in paradise. They landed in hell, and none more so than Angron. The Emperor knew where he was. He always did. But he waited. Some say he feared to intervene. Others say he was testing his son's strength. But whatever the reason, he arrived too late. By the time he descended upon Nuceria, Angron was no longer just a warrior. He was a scar made flesh. The nails had already consumed him. His spirit was half devoured, his compassion drowned beneath agony. And yet, the Emperor still saw a son, a fragment of his own divine spark buried under centuries of pain. When he reached out to save Angron, he told himself it was mercy, that removing him from that battlefield, from that slaughter, was an act of love. But mercy without understanding is cruelty. Wherein gold. In saving Angron's body, he condemned his soul. For millennia afterward, the Emperor justified his choice. He told himself that Angron could be healed, that discipline, war, and purpose would calm the storm inside him. He was wrong. Every campaign the World Eaters fought, every victory they won, pushed Angron further into madness. The Emperor watched as his son's legion tore itself apart, saw the nail's infection spread to others, and still, he did nothing, because the Emperor could not admit what he had done. He was the master of mankind, perfection incarnate. To acknowledge that he had failed was to admit that he was human, and that perhaps was the one thing he could never be. There are records sealed deep beneath the palace, reports written by custodians, Mechanicum adepts, even remembrancers who were later erased from history. They speak of moments when the Emperor, alone in his chambers, would stop and whisper Angron's name, not in anger, but in regret. When he built the golden throne, when he began his great work of godhood, He claimed it was to protect humanity from chaos, but some whisper that a part of that work was to protect himself, to drown his guilt in silence, to bury his shame beneath the machinery of eternity. Because the truth was simple, the Emperor loved Angron. Not as a weapon, not as a Primarch, but as a son, and that love destroyed them both. During the Siege of Terra, when Angron returned as the Red Angel, it was not just a battle, it was the inevitable confrontation between Creator and creation. The Emperor could have killed him outright. He had the power. But he didn't. He banished him. Witnesses said he hesitated, that for a single heartbeat, the master of mankind faltered. In that hesitation, there was no divinity, no godhood. Only a father looking at what he had done. When Angron roared, the Emperor didn't answer. When Angron struck, he only parried. When Angron fell, he turned away. Because how do you destroy something that still carries your face? Even now, as he sits upon the throne, a corpse in gold, kept alive by the prayers of 1,000,000,000,000 souls, the Emperor is not free from that memory. Some say his mind is lost in the warp, guiding humanity through visions. Others believe he is fully aware, trapped in an eternal prison of his own making. If the latter is true, then perhaps that is his punishment, to sit forever in the silence he once offered Angron. Every scream in the warp, every battle fought in his name, echoes back to him, reminders of the son he couldn't save. The son whose agony still shakes the stars. There's a passage from an erased text, written by Malkador the Sigillite, discovered only in fragments. He speaks of Angron in his dreams. He says the boy deserved peace. And then he weeps golden tears that turn to dust before they touch the floor. If it's true, then the Emperor's divinity is not his greatest strength. It is his greatest tragedy. Because in the end, gods do not cry for the dead. Only men do. And maybe that is the cruelest truth of all, that beneath all the myths, beneath the armor and the titles and the worship, the Emperor of mankind was never a god. He was just a father. A father who thought he could build perfection, and in doing so, broke the one soul that still reflected his humanity. When the last light of the Imperium fades, when the stars themselves die, perhaps the universe will fall silent once more. And in that silence, maybe the Emperor will finally whisper the words he never said aloud. I'm sorry, my son. In the endless nightmare of the 41st millennium, there are countless monsters. Demons, Xenos, traitors, and gods, all born from hatred, faith, or madness. But few inspire the kind of fear that Angron does. Because deep down, everyone understands him. He is not an alien. He is not unknowable. He is human rage made divine. That is why his story endures. When mortals speak of the Red Angel, they describe horror, wings of brass, claws like blades, a face twisted by eternal torment. But that horror isn't just what he is. It's what he represents. Ngr on is what happens when suffering is ignored, when compassion is replaced by control, when the desire for peace is twisted into obedience. He is the inevitable consequence of a civilization built on cruelty, a mirror held up to the Imperium, and to all of humanity. For 10,000 years the Imperium has called him a monster. But what does that say about the Emperor who made him? Because every sermon that praises the Emperor's light is cast over a shadow, and that shadow is Angron. He is the proof that divinity without empathy becomes tyranny, that even gods can be cruel, and even angels can fall. The Red Angel is not just one man's tragedy. He is the tragedy of the species. When you strip away the armor, the chains, the blood, What remains is a soul that only ever wanted to be free. A slave who fought for others, who was denied peace by those who claimed to love him, who was told his suffering was destiny. And that's what makes him terrifying. Not because he's a monster, but because he was right. The Imperium would rather worship pain than learn from it. It would rather sanctify suffering than end it. And in that way, the galaxy itself keeps Angron alive. Every war, every purge, every innocent life crushed beneath the machine of empire, they are prayers to him. Not to Khorne. To him, the Emperor sits silent upon his throne. Khorne roars in the warp, but somewhere between those two extremes, between apathy and rage, stands Angron, howling forever into the void, demanding an answer that will never come. What does freedom mean when everything you love turns to ash? What is mercy when it's given by hands that don't understand your pain? What is godhood if all it does is justify cruelty? Angron's existence asks these questions, and the galaxy cannot bear them. So it buries them beneath myth. It paints him as a demon, because calling him human would be unbearable. And yet, some still remember among the world eaters, those who still feel the echoes of who they once were. There are warriors who pause before battle. For just a heartbeat, they whisper his name not as a curse, but as a prayer. Not to beg for victory, but to be seen. Because Angron was the only god who ever understood what it meant to suffer and to be forgotten. That is his legacy, not the worlds he burned, or the blood he spilled, but the truth that hides beneath it all, that the universe creates monsters, and then pretends to be shocked when they howl. When the Imperium looks upon the Red Angel, it sees a cautionary tale. When the servants of chaos look upon him, they see glory. But both are wrong. Angron is not a warning. He is a mirror. Every empire that demands obedience, every tyrant who calls their cruelty order, every god who demands sacrifice without compassion, they are just reflections of him. And so the cycle continues. The Emperor builds his golden dream. Angron shatters it in blood. Humanity rebuilds, and the nails scream again. Because the truth of Angron's story is that it never ended. It never will. He is the scream that echoes whatever someone calls suffering necessary. He is the shadow that falls behind every banner of righteousness. He is the silence after every act of mercy that comes too late. In a galaxy where gods are cruel and men are worse, Angron's rage becomes something almost holy, not because it's good, but because it's honest. He does not lie. He does not pretend. He simply rages against fate, against control, against a universe that demanded he kneel. And in that endless bloody defiance, there is a kind of purity. Maybe that is why the galaxy still fears him. Not because he is evil, but because, in his fury, there is truth. Because deep down, every mortal who hears his roar, whether on a battlefield or in their dreams, recognizes it. They have felt it too. That desperate, wordless scream for freedom that the universe always silences. The Red Angel does not ask for forgiveness. He does not seek redemption. He simply is a god of rage born from human pain. A son who never stops screaming for his father to understand. And a reflection of everything we choose not to see. Perhaps, one day, when the stars finally die and the last wars are fought, the galaxy will fall silent at last. And in that silence, maybe Angron will too. Maybe the nails will stop. Maybe he will rest. Until then, his wings will blot out the suns. His roar will shake the heavens, and the name Angron will echo across eternity, not as a curse, but as a reminder that monsters are not born. They're made.